Private notice question on hereditary peers in the House of Lords. Lord Strathclyde.
My Lords, I beg leave to ask a question of which I have given private notice and I declare my interest. The question is as follows. To ask His Majesty's Government, 1, what plans they have for the removal of accepted peers from the House of Lords, and 2, whether they plan to keep the House informed on any proposed changes to its composition before the publication of relevant legislation.
My Lords, I think the Noble Lord's question referred to accepted hereditary peers at the beginning, but my Lords, today the Government, probably as we speak, is introducing a bill in the other place that delivers on our clear manifesto commitment to bring about an immediate reform by removing the right of the remaining hereditary peers to sit and to vote in your House of Lords. The bill was included in the King's speech, which was debated at length in your Lordship's House. The bill completed the process started a quarter of a century ago to remove hereditary peers from Parliament. The Government is, of course, keen to maintain an ongoing dialogue with your Lordships regarding this legislation and the Government's other manifesto commitments on reforming this House.
My Lords, while thanking the noble Baroness, the Leader of the House, for that answer, isn't it a bit shoddy that she was prepared to speak to the press yesterday and had to be summoned to the dispatch box today, rather than make a statement to the House about one of the most important issues facing this House, namely the composition of the House itself? My Lords, this is a high-handed, shoddy political act, removing some of our most senior and experienced peers, such as the convener of the crossbenches, Lord Kinnoul, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Lord Howe, and many others who have held some of the most senior positions in government and in commerce. My Lords, why is it that the government and the noble Baroness have not sought forward to have any discussions or consultations amongst the parties? 25 years ago, there were countless debates and questions that took place in the House and ultimately finished up with an agreed and consensual way forward agreed within the parties. Why are there no proposals about removing those peers from the House who very rarely come, rather than those who have shown an active commitment over many years? I hope that noble Baroness will now engage with usual channels to find a suitable day for a debate on the floor of the House to discuss proper reform of the House of Lords.
I've always admired the noble Lord's ingenuity, and none more so than today. I think it's a bit of a long reach to say the statement should be made to this House first. I have to say to noble Lords, the conversations I've had since this was first debated when we had hereditary peers by-elections. It was debated following the manifesto commitment from the Labour Party. I've had numerous conversations since the election and will continue to do so. What has happened is a bill has been introduced today into the other place. It will come to your Lordship's House in the normal way, and we'll have the normal discussions in the normal way. And your Lordship, he says there was agreement previously. I think it's because there wasn't agreement during the passage of the bill that further discussions took place and temporary arrangements were made on a transitional basis to exempt some hereditary peers from the legislation going forward. This is completing that process that took place. I would remind him, my comment to the press about the bill being introduced in the normal way as we do started recognising the valuable contributions that many hereditary peers have made to Parliament.
In the House that my party is committed to further reform this House, including the introduction of an elected element which we first declared as party policy in 1911. I also remind the House that during the last Parliament a number of Conservatives who know very well spent a great deal of time complaining that the Liberal Democrats were overrepresented in this House because of our small numbers in the Commons. It's quite clear now that one of the most immediate problems we have in this House is the overrepresentation of Conservatives compared to their small numbers in the Commons. Can the Leader of the House tell us whether there have so far been any discussions on a voluntary reduction in Conservative numbers in this House to reflect the new situation since the election?
I've had no approaches from the party opposite about their numbers they have. But on the point he makes about wider Lords reform, one of the arguments has been for the last 25 years that nothing should be done until everything can be done, but nobody agrees on what everything is. And peaceful approach is by far, I think, the better way. And I have to say to the party opposite complaining about Lords reform, in the years they were in government, the only proposal they came forward with was to move the House of Lords to York.
No, I think it's this side. My Lord, could the Leader of the House advise me, was this included in the Labour Party manifesto? What was the result of the general election? What was the majority achieved by the Labour Party? But perhaps on a more serious note, could the Leader of the House confirm that if any of the hereditary peers were thought fit to be appointed as life peers, that could be done?
On the first part of my noble friend's question, this was part of the manifesto for the Labour Party at the last election. And Labour Lords may recall that when the bill was blocked, my bill from my noble friend Lord Grocott to end the by-elections for hereditary peers, that was stopped going through the House. And that might have been 10, 15, 20 years ago a better way forward, but that opportunity has now passed and the election result was quite clear. I can confirm that if members leave this House as hereditary peers, there is no block at all on them remaining coming back as life peers if their party so wishes to introduce them.
On the subject of commitments and the manifesto and what was said about House of Lords reform by the party opposite, what has happened to the proposal to expel everyone after they reach the age of 80? Why has that been dropped from this bill? And is the answer not that this is a naked attempt to disable opposition in this House from a government which has a majority in the other place, and where this place is the only part of Parliament which properly scrutinises legislation? What the government is doing is undermining the ability of us to carry out our duties effectively.
Again, the ingenuity of the noble lord is always impressive, and he knows that isn't the case. He also knows that the Labour Party manifesto at the last election was the only manifesto I have seen in recent years that praised the work of this House, and it continues to do so, and recognise the valuable work that is done. As I said in my question to Noble Lord Wallace, one of the things I think is important in this House is incremental reform. That manifesto commitment on retirement age, on participation, as I've said before, and I think he was present in, I think, at least 2 debates in the King's Speech where this was repeated, is a matter we'll be consulting with the House on. But the manifesto also talked about immediate action on this particular issue. The other commitments, of course, remain, and they will come forward in due course after discussions and dialogue across the House.
The lady doesn't quite seem to understand, although she's very good on these things, that her party is dabbling with constitutional reform. And surely she, amongst many, agrees that when it comes to constitutional reform, it is absolutely essential that there is agreement between the parties, all parties. Otherwise, we spend years and years in useless argument and getting nowhere. Does she not accept that on this issue, too, once she touches, she's just learnt from some responses she's just had, once you touch on constitutional issues, the time has come to try and to work out a common way forward, the future common ground, in a sensible and mature and adult way, and not get lost in party ding-dong.
I think the Noble has been a little patronising to me, saying I don't understand constitutional issues. I think where consensus is possible, I'd be very happy to reach consensus. And as the Noble Lord Strathclyde said, eventually, a quarter of a century ago, there was a consensus that transitional arrangements would be made for the remaining hereditary peers.
My lords.
Will the Lady the Minister use this opportunity to end another long-standing anomaly, whereby the wives of lords and barons have the title lady, confusing them with those who've earned the title, and either end that or change it so that our husbands or partners of women peers also get some sort of honorific title?
I think there are mixed views across the House on this issue, and I have to say that Mr. Smith might not appreciate having a title. It does seem an anomaly. Not one, I think, that overly concerns the House, but I note the noble lady's comments.
My Lord. Can my noble friend remind the House how many of the hereditary peerage in this House are women?
I do recall some years ago that there was the noble lady, the Countess of Mar. Yes. I think there may have been one other member of the House of Lords who was female. There are none currently, and as far as I'm aware, there are none eligible for election in the hereditary peers by-elections.
My Lords,
to use the standing orders of this House in order to avoid our statutory obligations in relation to the holding of hereditary peers, accepted peers by-elections. The noble Baroness, the leader of the House, said when I raised it before that she was confident that that move did not breach the law. But it has since been suggested to me that the legal advice she received was more ambivalent on the matter. Is she willing to publish the legal advice on which that extraordinary decision to avoid our statutory obligations was based, and show respect for the rule of law in doing so?
My Lords, when that decision was taken, it is entirely and completely within the rule of law. The legislation states the House should hold by-elections. How it holds them is a matter for this House. I was approached by members from across this House, including from front benches, that they would wish those by-elections not to take place during the passage of the bill, and therefore the House made the decision, under the standing orders of this House, to pause the by-elections for a period of 18 months, and so they could be held within 18 months. That is entirely within the law, and it was with the full agreement, other than your noble lord, of this House.
My Lords, one of the benefits of this House is that some of us have been around a long time, and I was much involved in the decision 25 years ago. And the truth was that Viscount Cranbourne, now Marquess of Salisbury, had tied the Labour government up in knots. And the decision to allow the hereditary peers was a way of untying that knot by a solemn promise that legislation would be brought forward, a proper reform of the House of Lords. I'm afraid simply to abandon that deal that was made 25 years ago without the substantial reform of the Lords is a sham.
I disagree with the noble lord on his final point, but I know he is committed to an elected House, and I would expect him to make that point. But it is interesting that when the debate was going through the House of Lords a quarter of a century ago, there was concern about it from a large number of hereditary peers within the Lordship's House at that time, and arrangements were made in order to smooth the passage of the bill that 92 hereditary peers would remain on hereditary basis. I think on the basis of that deal, the noble Lord Cranbourne was sacked from his job as leader of the opposition then, and I think it was noble Lord Strathclyde who was put in his place at that time. He was the beneficiary perhaps of that. But I think, we're talking about, and I've always thought, and the point made by the noble Lord Howe, is that constitutional reform is taken with care and with consideration, and 25 years seems a fair amount of care and consideration.
Yeah. Now, my Lords, for the avoidance of doubt, I should say that I was the one who proposed that we look at the by-election matter, and I think that I have always repeatedly made clear from this dispatch book, from that dispatch book as leader and since, that I believe, my Lords, that the best way forward for this House, certainly in areas of constitutional change, is by consensus and not on the basis of divisive and partisan legislation. And, my Lords, there is a further point that is wider than this. It is a courtesy and a duty to Parliament for ministers to come to Parliament, and certainly an affected House, to make a statement on novel legislative matters before they're spewed out in The Guardian, The Times and the media. Now, my Lords, I don't know whether it was the decision of the noble Baroness that the pre-spin be done in this way. Perhaps it was she was instructed by number 10 not to make a statement in this House. But, my Lords, it wasn't typical of her. It's unlike her. And I think that the misjudgment not to make a statement in this House didn't reflect her normal courtesy. I welcome some of the things that she said, so will she repeat her undertaking to enter into discussions now in the spirit of consensus? My door is open, and I'm sure the Noble Earl's is also.
My Lords, first of all, thank him for his comments on the Hereditary Peers by-election, and both he and the Noble Earl Canua once approached me. And in terms of constructive debate, I can tell him I spoke to the crossbench peers yesterday, and I'd welcome an invitation to the Conservative, which I don't think the Noble Lord is able to go as a matter of course, goes by invitation. I would welcome an invitation too. I have to say to him, I think it's a bit of faux anger on his part about a statement to this House. This was an issue that was in the Labour Party manifesto. I think during the King's Speech debate, it was almost the entire content of the Noble Lord when he responded to the comments I made, indeed on the constitutional debate. And it is normal when a bill is introduced into either House for a comment to be made. I wanted to ensure the comment was also on record that we welcomed and appreciated the contribution made by hereditary peers, and that is why it's in the statement. It's perfectly normal and the normal way of doing things. It did not come as a surprise to the Noble Lord. I said it's debated in this House on many occasions. The dialogue continues, and it will continue, I'm sure.